I'm always getting questions about how to simplify plant care, how to enjoy being surrounded by plants at home without it feeling too difficult or overwhelming. Now, obviously, the most important thing to start with is understanding your space and the conditions that you're able to offer, but then also choosing plants that aren't going to give you too much grief. So today I thought I would take you through 10 of my favourite, super easy to care for houseplants, break down their care needs for you and tell you why I love them so much. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learnt over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And I've tried to mix it up for this video and pick some slightly more unusual houseplants that I don't think are talked about enough. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So the first one on my list is one of my biggest plants and potentially one of the most difficult to move. So I'm going to attempt to bring it over, but I may need to put some clips in. So this giant is my bird of paradise, and the bird of paradise is native to South Africa, and when you find the right conditions for this plant, in my experience, it is ridiculously easy to care for. The only thing with this plant is that if you do live in fairly low light conditions, you will need to invest in a grow light in order to grow this one effectively, because it is a plant that enjoys very high levels of light. I'm currently growing mine right over by the window. To be honest, it probably would benefit from even more light, but currently with my space and the amount of plants I've got, that is the most that I can possibly do right now. And to be honest, I don't monitor this one that strategically when it comes to water. And I know that is something that kind of perhaps sounds like it's going against other things that I say in my videos. Typically with this one, when I look at it, and it's such a subtle difference, but for me, I can kind of tell when it doesn't look quite as vibrant as it usually does, then I tend to check its soil. And this is one that I do let almost completely dry out between waterings. It is, in my experience, a very drought tolerant plant. So if you're someone that loves the look of houseplants but doesn't want to do that much actual caring for the plants, so long as I say, you can provide the right lighting conditions, I would say this one is an absolute winner. I think it is just so beautiful and jungly. Like, it's the one plant in my space that when I walk into the room, I'm like, it just gives such a jungly vibe. It just really makes the place feel tropical and exotic, I want to say. And I got this one a couple of years ago now, and it was much smaller than it is right now. I could hold it in a little pot like that and it came up to about there, and it has sized up very, very quickly. And I've said it before, but this isn't a plant that typically I think of as being particularly fast growing. But I think because with each new leaf, like for example, it's just given me this new leaf here. With each new leaf, it makes such a dramatic difference to the appearance of the plant overall. I do kind of think of it as a faster growing plant. And also, I was going to say, its leaves currently are incredibly dusty, and I was thinking that about all of the plants on that side, and I've just realised that Ross has been doing cosplay stuff in here, which involves shaving some foam, and so I think that is probably what's happening. But one thing I was going to say is with this plant, because it does love light so much, it's very important. It's important with all of your houseplants, but particularly highlight plants such as this one. It's really important to make sure that you are keeping its leaves clean, free from dust and dirt, just because if it does have a layer of dust, like this one at the moment does over its leaves, I'm not sure how you'll be able to see, but if I wipe there, yeah, you can really see that. Look at that. If I don't give those leaves a wipe over, then it won't be able to effectively photosynthesize. It won't be able to absorb all of the light it needs in order to grow healthily. So yeah, that's the only thing really with this plant that I am very strategic about usually keeping on top of. And another very common question that I get with this plant is, why do the leaves split like this? As you can see, the leaves, as they mature, do start to kind of rip and split. And I know a lot of people don't like the look of this, but it is actually a practical and very normal thing that the plant does in nature. It basically just allows the elements to pass through the plant. So for example, wind doesn't break the plant as easily, it doesn't tear its leaves, it allows more water to be able to reach the soil, it allows more light to be able to pass through and reach reach lower leaves. It is all very practical things that the plant is doing, and it's nothing to worry about at all. The one thing that you do just have to be a little bit wary of with this plant is overwatering, and I'm going to say that about quite a lot of the ones that I show you today. Overwatering is basically not giving your plant too much water in one session. It's watering your plant when your plant is not ready for a drink, or not allowing water to properly drain from your plant's roots after you've watered it. And I've already said that this one is quite drought tolerant. It's basically just very important to make sure that A, your plant's got good drainage, and that you're not watering when the soil is still damp. Honestly, wait for it to dry out. As I say, drought tolerant plant right here. It's going to be absolutely fine if you wait a few days. If you're not entirely sure, wait another couple of days and come back and then water the plant. Because yeah, that's where I've heard people going wrong the most. So yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of this one, but it's one of my favourite plants, and as I say, it is super, super, super easy to keep happy. And then this next one is the Aglaonema Silver Queen, and Aglaonema as a genus is one that I have banged on about so much in videos before. I think it is just the most wonderful genus of plants if you are looking for something very diverse, very hardy. And I would say the Silver Queen is probably one of my very close top favourites. I'm not sure if it's right at the top because I have got a few that I love, but I just adore it. I think the colour of its leaves and the patterns are just beautiful. And I've said it before, there's something about this one, I think how kind of bright and dramatic and contrasting it is. It almost reminds me of calatheas. And if you don't already know, calatheas have a reputation for being quite dramatic and sensitive plants, probably not ones that I would personally recommend for beginners. So I feel like Aglaonema is kind of a hardier and definitely much lower maintenance version of calatheas. It's kind of like a duplicate for calatheas. And I think I've currently got about 7 or 8 different species of Aglaonema in my collection. And I've said it before, but when you've got a lot of houseplants like I do, I've got a lot of kind of quite finicky tropical plants, ones that require quite high levels of care. It's very nice to balance that out with the ones that just pretty much continuously look gorgeous and you don't have to do a lot too. And that is another reason why I just think Aglaonema is fantastic. It's also one that I have never, ever, ever, I don't want to jinx it, but I have never encountered pests with. I've never had pests of any sort, and that cannot be said about many plants in my collection. So yeah, I think it's just a fantastic all-round one. The only annoying thing with Aglaonema is that it's not pet safe. So if you do have this type of plant and you've got pets that are prone to nibbling things, then I would definitely recommend raising it up, keeping it out of reach. I've said this before, but I myself have got a dog. I've got Yoli. She has never once ever paid any attention to the plants. And I think it's important to remind ourselves, whilst also being very cautious and careful and monitoring our pets around plants, that is obviously priority, but it is important to remember that animals come into contact with poisonous plants every single day if they're allowed out of the house. Most of, or a large majority of the plants out in the wild are toxic to animals. They do tend to have a certain, most of them tend to have an instinct as to what they should and shouldn't eat. As I say, that is not me saying don't monitor your pets around plants, because you absolutely should. But I think if you like a plant and you can put the correct measures in place to keep your pets and children, of course, safe, then it shouldn't be a reason not to have a plant. That is just my opinion. Just my opinion. But yeah, this one is fantastic. And I honestly, as I say, could not rave about it enough. It's just gorgeous. And then one that I really don't need much of an excuse to talk about, because it is potentially my favourite plant right now, is the Antherium pallidiflorum. And this one's native to the rainforests of Ecuador. And it's a plant that I wanted for such a long time. This was a wish list plant for me for years and years and years. I finally got it at the beginning of the year. So I've had this plant since January, February, March, April. So I've had this plant for 3 months now. And obviously 3 months isn't perhaps an extensive amount of time when it comes to getting to know the plant long term, but I have found this 100% the easiest Antherium I've ever grown, but it has also been one of my lowest maintenance plants in the time that I've owned it. So in fact, I kind of put off getting this plant for a while a few years back because I was worried that I would not be able to care for it. And actually this is one that I really wish I had added to my collection sooner. It's got these beautiful long strappy leaves that are so velvety, and then it's got that beautiful white vein that just runs all the way down the middle, and I just think it is the most stunning plant. It's also very quick to size up, because when I first got this plant, I think I'm right in saying it only had 2 leaves. I think it had these 2, and I think this one here, if I'm correct, was unfurling as I got it, and then it gave me that leaf, and it's just given me this leaf, and as you can see already, it's starting to give me another one there. So it's very, very quick to grow when kept in the right conditions. And this is an Antherium that is still, where I am from, the UK, it's still considered to be quite rare. And for that reason, the price on this plant is still quite expensive in most places that I've seen. However, because of how quick it is to grow, and by the looks of it, by the aerial roots that I can see at the top just there, how easy it's going to be to propagate, I would have thought the price on this plant would be coming down quite dramatically in the next year, let's say. So if you're on the fence about this plant and you're not sure whether to do it now, I would personally say maybe wait a bit, because I don't see why this plant won't be more accessible soon, if that makes sense. But this is one that I'm growing right over by the window. It's currently receiving some direct sunlight, but obviously we have just come into spring. I think I probably will move it back from the window just a little bit as we get into the summer months, because I don't think, from what I know about the plant, it would be one that would tolerate high levels of direct light particularly well. I also am watering this plant more so than I have done for some of my other Antheriums, and that's because I'm growing it in an almost soilless mix. You probably can't tell, but this is basically tree fern fibre, orchid bark, perlite, and a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of soil, and it doesn't retain moisture all that well, but it essentially just mimics what this plant would be growing on in its natural growing conditions, because it is an epiphytic plant, meaning that it doesn't usually grow right out of the ground. It will grow attached to other plants, rocks in its environment. So yeah, that's how I found to keep this plant happy so far. But all I'm doing is just waiting until the top layer here, I've just put a little milkshake cup over it, but I'm just waiting until that moss becomes a little bit dry, and then I'm watering it through, and then I'm putting it back on its shelf. And that's all I've done for the last 3 months, and it has given me the most insane growth. So yeah, if you are looking for something a little bit more unusual, then I would say this is potentially one to go for. As I say, I wish I had done it sooner. And this next one again is a very big one, so I'm going to do my best to show you. So I haven't shown you this plant in a while, but it is my Euphorbia acrorensis, which, as you can probably see, is now taller than me. And this one lives next door in the bedroom now, just because I did a little shift around a while ago, and I decided to put some of my lower maintenance plants that I didn't need to monitor that much next door. And this is one of them, and that is also one of the reasons why it is on the easiest plants list, because I do virtually nothing to this plant nowadays. Because it is a succulent, it is one that likes fairly high levels of light. I mean, the higher the better, but I'm not able to provide it with any direct light through in the bedroom, so it does just kind of get a mix of kind of medium to bright indirect, depending on the day and depending on the time of day. As I say, if I had more space, then I would absolutely be growing this one, probably in full sun, because that's when it grows the quickest. But I got this plant, I think about 4 years ago now, and I got it as a teeny tiny little thing. If you look back on my older videos, I'm picking it up with one hand, and it's crazy the amount of growth it's given me. I've said it before, but it looks like a cactus and grows like a philodendron. It's absolutely insane. But this is one as well, although absolutely if you're able to offer it bright lighting conditions, then you should, and that is how the plant is going to thrive. But it is one that is quite adaptable when it comes to that. And I know this firsthand because I did at one point when I had this plant have to grow it in a very low light environment. And although the plant gave me pretty much no growth during that time and probably wasn't that happy, it did cope better with it than some of my other kind of more tropical foliagey plants, which I was quite surprised about considering how much light this plant usually likes. The one thing, again, similarly to what I said about the bird of paradise, that you do need to make sure with this one is that it's kept clean. And because it is such a spiky plant, that can be quite difficult. So what I tend to do is just get a duster and just dust it down. Occasionally I'll get it into the shower, like once every few months, and I'll give it a spritz down. But on the whole, I just use the duster. And apart from that, I just let it pretty much completely dry out between waterings. I'm currently watering this one maybe once a month. Again, it's incredibly drought tolerant. There have 100% been times that I've gone, oh my God, I'm neglecting the bedroom plants, and I've gone next door and I'm like, when was the last time I watered? I think it was a few months ago, and this one's been fine. So yeah, again, the biggest downfall of this plant is 100% overwatering. So if you know that you are prone to giving your plants a little bit too much water or watering too frequently, this might not be the plant for you. But if you're looking for something very unusual, very kind of cool and tropical looking, you don't have little ones that are going to run into it because, as I say, it's very spiky, then this plant is just awesome. Honestly, it is one of my favourites. And if I was able to make this room 10 times bigger, then I would 100% keep it in this room because I love looking at it all the time. And there are some plants that I've now put next door that I feel like I don't appreciate as much as I could because I don't see them as much. So yeah, when I've got a bigger space, I'm really excited to have this plant in its prime spot on display, as she should be, because oh my goodness, she is just gorgeous. And with a lot of the easy plant lists that you see online, people are always banging on about snake plants, and for very good reason, because they are ridiculously easy to care for. But I feel like snake plants have become, to some people, a little bit bog standard, and people don't talk about all the amazing different varieties that you can get. So I thought I would bring one over to show you that is quite unusual and I just think super, super cool. This is a Sansevieria Bantel Sensation. And there are so many incredible types of snake plants that I feel like just don't get enough credit. The Moonshine is another one that I've spoken about before, and I will put a clip in of because I think it is just stunning. But these are such fantastic plants if you're looking for something, again, very low maintenance that you don't have to do a lot to. They just add a nice pop of texture and colour without you having to do that much to upkeep it, because again, they are one that is incredibly adaptable lighting wise. This one at the moment, actually, I am growing over by my window just purely for the fact that I haven't had it that long. This was actually very kindly sent to me by one of you guys at the beginning of the year, and I'm absolutely in love with it. So yeah, as it acclimates, as it adjusts, and as I'm trying to get it to give me some lovely new growth and get it to fill out a little bit, I'm keeping it in very high light. But they are a type of plant that can also survive in very low light conditions. I've got snake plants in pretty much every dark corner that can't have any other plants in it in my home, and they are amazing. Similarly to what I've said about a lot of the other plants in this video, overwatering is the biggest downfall with these ones. So making sure that they've got good drainage. If you are growing them in a pretty pot cover, just take them out when you water them. And because this is a succulent, again, I let mine completely dry out in between waterings. And it's important to say with snake plants, and I know I just very briefly touched on it, is that although they are very adaptable when it comes to light, but if you're able to grow them in high light, that does replicate what they'd be receiving in their natural habitats. They're native to Central West Africa, and that is going to bring out the best in them and get them to grow very quickly. I say very quickly, they're still not the fastest growers in the world, but you're going to increase the rate at which they grow compared to if you are keeping them in a very dark spot. I know I've said it before, but surviving and thriving are two very different things. However, if you don't have a home with much light, then they are going to be absolutely fine in lower light conditions. They also don't require very high levels of humidity, so standard household humidity is absolutely fine. They just tick all the boxes for me, and I think they're just lovely. And as I say, this is a type of Sansevieria that I'm really excited about because I've never owned it before. Oh, and this one's been in the dusty spot as well, so it's not looking as great as it could be. But this is my very big Philodendron Dean McDowell, and oh my goodness, this is one of the most beautiful, rewarding plants to grow in my collection that again requires very little care. Mine, as you can see, has grown to be absolutely ginormous. There's not really a good way to get her all in shot to show you. But part of the reason is also, as you can see, this is a crawling plant, which basically means this is one that will not grow upright, it won't grow on a moss pole, and it is going to do best if you grow it in a trough planter like this. But often if you look at crawling plants, they are a very good indicator as to the lighting conditions that a plant is going to appreciate. And because this one in its natural habitat will creep across the forest floor instead of grow up towards the light, it is one that's going to survive in slightly lower lighting conditions. conditions. I think the spot I've got mine in there is probably kind of on the upper end of low light, low to medium light, I would say. And this one is so happy. I've had it for just over a year now, and it only had 2 very small leaves when I first got it. So as you can tell, the growth it's given me in a short amount of time is absolutely insane. But as I say, the level of care that I actually give this plant is second to none. I mean, again, most of the time I make sure its leaves are kept clean and dust free. When I notice its leaves are starting to drop a little bit, that's often an indicator that it needs a drink. So I'll typically then just take it through to the shower, give it a shower off and give it a water through at the same time. And really that's all I've done. I've kept it and grown it in that spot since I've owned the plant. So it's obviously very happy there, and I haven't really done much else. I fertilise it. I fertilise all of these plants. I've said it before, but if a plant in my collection is actively growing, actively putting out new growth, I will personally continue to fertilise all year round. And that seems like the right thing for most of my plants because they seem pretty happy. I was going to say as well, so I've just spoken about crawling plants, and I know you might be looking at this going, oh my goodness, well, if that's a really easy one, then maybe I'll get, I don't know, the Gloriosum, for example. And although the Gloriosum, in my experience, isn't the most difficult plant in the world, one of the reasons why I believe this one is so easy is because it's actually a hybrid plant. This one, its 2 parent plants are the Pastorzanum and the Gloriosum. And I often find that plants that have 2 different parent plants are just hardier and more resilient. And I think that's kind of like, I mean, it's the same principle as like, I was going to give an example I probably shouldn't give on my channel. Let's say you have 2 different breeds of dog. They are likely probably going to produce a dog that is less susceptible to disease than if you were to have a purebred, and that's why purebreds have often much more issues. Is that a bad way of explaining it? Possibly. But typically, and this goes for, in fact, all of the plants in my collection, I find hybrids much easier to grow. For example, the Philodendron Splendid as well, I find easier than the Melanochrysum, etc, etc. So yeah, this is just a really lovely hybrid. It's got the most beautiful pillowy leaves, and in my experience, it is just a dream to grow. The only thing with this one is that although it doesn't need ridiculously high humidity levels, there have been times where if I haven't run my humidifier for a few days and it's dropped kind of below about 50%, I have noticed the leaves get a little bit crinkly and look a little bit brittle. So again, I would say anything above 50% humidity is absolutely fine. But yeah, it's a great plant. And one that lives very happily in this little gap here down by my bin is my ZZ plant, and this is one that I very rarely talk about, to be honest, because it's again it's not the fastest in the world to grow, and when it does grow it puts out a big kind of stalk of leaves, a big stem of leaves, instead of just doing 1 leaf at a time, which is really lovely. But at this time of year in the spot that I'm growing mine in, it hasn't happened that much, and I think that is because we're just coming out of the colder, darker winter months. I'm hoping I'll get some new growth off this plant as we move into spring. But it's just a really cool one. If you're looking for just a little pop of green and one that you really won't have to do much to, then I could not recommend the ZZ plant enough. This one, I can't even remember. Oh, I'm feeling its soil now and it's bone dry. I can't even remember the last time I watered this one. I will typically wait until it completely dries out. It's definitely due for a drink now. And it's actually very much on par, in my experience, with Sansevieria, with snake plants, in terms of its lighting requirements. Again, if you can grow this plant in kind of the upper end of medium to high light, it will be happiest. However, if you do only have a very low light spot, it's gonna be absolutely fine. Like when I first moved in here, this one was growing in my hallway, and I actually don't have any windows in my hallway at all. It was only getting very indirect low light from the window in here in the bedroom. So yeah, it's one that's never given me any grief at all. And it's also a really easy one to propagate. And I think when we're talking about beginner plants, that's quite a fun thing to take into consideration. Like if you're wanting to play about with propagating for the first time and you don't have much experience doing it, this is a really, really great one to give a go. You can just take a cutting pretty much anywhere, remove the lower leaves and just stick it into either water, sphagnum moss. Some people do propagate this one straight into soil, and personally I've never done that, but it propagates so quickly, and you'll notice if you grow it in water it's starting to root very, very soon. And then you can either pot that one up. In fact, I was going to say, as its own little plant, I've got one of the babies that I took as a propagation from the mother plants just here, potted up. So yeah, you can either pot it up as its own plant, or if you want to just fill out your mother plant a little bit more, then you can pot it up with the mother plant and just bulk her out a bit. But yeah, the ZZ plant is one that I just find really enjoyable to grow. It's one that I don't have to think about too much. I very much enjoy, just as I say, having a little pop of green in the kitchen without having to do that much in order to keep it happy. So yeah, it's a very easy one. And I know there might be some raised eyebrows when I say that I've got an Alocasia on this list, because they are typically known for being slightly more challenging plants. But this one's really easy, so I thought I would include it. It is the Alocasia Regal Shield, and just look at how beautiful those leaves are. It's also got these gorgeous kind of purpley backs to its leaves as it matures, and I think it's just stunning. And as I say, there are some types of Alocasia that I definitely wouldn't put on this list. Not even because they're really, really difficult to look after, but just because when things start going wrong, they go wrong very quickly. Whereas I've had this one almost a year now. I haven't been able to say this before, but this was actually given to me by one of the production team on Gardener's World when they came to film my segment. He very kindly brought me a pup from his plant, and it was literally teeny, teeny tiny when I got it. So this is how much it has grown up in 11 and a half months, which I think is pretty incredible. Like, these plants can grow to be ginormous. I've seen ones that are kind of like bigger than me, and I think this one is definitely getting on for that. But the way that I grow mine, also getting distracted, but I've just seen a little baby popping up down there. But the way that I'm growing mine, and the way that I keep things very, very simple with this plant, I do grow it in semi-hydro. I've spoken about this before, but I grow pretty much all of my Alocasias in semi-hydro, semi-hydroponics. This is a Lechuza Pon equivalent, which I get from Soil Ninja. And what I've done here is I'm just using an old coffee jar, and I will just fill a little reservoir of water to the bottom, and that water will be fed up and the plant can just feed off it in that way. And that's how I keep this one happy. I don't worry about drainage, I don't worry about monitoring soil, anything like that. All I do is keep it in a fairly bright spot. This one's about 2 meters back from this window, which is south facing, and it seems very happy. This is also another type of Alocasia that is better, I'm not going to say amazing, but can cope better at surviving in lower lighting conditions. I'm not going to say low light, but I would say medium lighting conditions. This one is just much more resilient and adaptable than lots of other Alocasia. So again, if you're wanting to add something a little bit different, a little bit quirky, a little bit unusual to your collection, and you're perhaps just wanting to kind of give Alocasia a go and kind of, I was going to say, dip your toe in the water, figure out what it's all about. This is just a really lovely one to start with, in my opinion. I just find it such a joy to grow. I love watching it size up, and it's just lovely to have one in my collection that I really don't have to worry about. As I say, I'll just top up its reservoir once a week, once every week and a half, something like that. And apart from that, I do very little to keep it happy. And then going back to Dusty Shelf, I've got the cast iron plant. And this is one that, again, I don't talk about that much. And I feel like the main reason that I don't talk about this plant more is just purely for the fact that it is quite slow growing. I don't always have the most exciting growth updates to give you, but I've just recently included this in one of my reels that I did talking about easy and low light plants, because very similarly to the ZZ plants, this one is amazingly adaptable when it comes to light. And this one has grown in, at times, almost no light in my collection, and no plant should ever survive in zero lighting conditions. But as I've said before, there have been times as a plant parent where I haven't been in the position to be able to offer all of my plants the light that they deserve. So yeah, this one's been amazingly adaptable. I got it for my birthday a couple of years ago, and it's given me, I'm trying to think, it was when I look back at pictures of it from then, it was significantly smaller, but I'm trying to think of the last time it actually gave me a new leaf, and it was quite a while ago. It definitely hasn't given me any new ones this year. But yeah, again, I let this one completely dry out. It's not one that you need to worry about ridiculously high humidity levels with. Household, just kind of standard household, will be absolutely fine. And as I say, adaptability when it comes to light is just amazing. And it is one that if you are impatient like me, I would recommend maybe, and it's not often I say this, but maybe buying it a little bit bigger. A lot of the time, like for example with the Regal Shield, I'll get a plant as a little kind of baby small plant and I'll enjoy growing it into a big thing myself. If you're wanting something like this, I personally would say it's going to take quite a few years to get here. So yeah, it is one that I would probably say if you want to buy it a little bit bigger. But again, I do think there's definitely more that I could be doing as a plant parent to bring out better potential in this plant. If I did have a little bit more light, I think upping its light slightly would definitely help. But as I say, at the moment, with the amount of plants I've got, without doing a whole new grow light setup, I'm not in the position to offer any more currently. But it's coping well. But yeah, it's just a lovely one and one that I would 100% recommend. And then finally, another really, really beautiful, very easygoing plant is the Philodendron Bueno. And this one's native to Colombia. And I've had this one in my collection for, I think, about 1.5 years now. I got this as a one leaf cutting at another plant swap a couple of years ago, and I propagated it in sphagnum moss, and it was one that I was just over the moon to add to my collection because I'd wanted it for a really long time and I didn't really know that much about it. I didn't know that much about how to grow it, and I wasn't sure whether or not it would be that easy. But oh my goodness, this one it's just coped amazingly in so many different conditions. It doesn't have any specialised conditions that I'm growing it in. It's tucked just by my big Monstera deliciosa in the corner there. It gets a little bit of light from the grow lights, but equally again, it hasn't always received that much light and it's been absolutely fine. Oh my goodness, I'm a little bit ashamed because I need to get this plant onto a moss pole. Look at those aerial roots. They are just crazy, and this plant will likely continue to size up even more if I was to get it onto a moss pole, because as you can see, it is an upright plant, it's a climber, and it would love to climb. But this is one that I'm actually, again, similarly to the Alocasia Regal Shield I showed you, I am growing this one in semi-hydro, which is a little bit difficult to show you because the bamboo cane is hitting the ceiling. But yeah, I've grown this one in soil and in semi-hydro, and I haven't found it makes a massive difference either way. But again, just in terms of making my life a little bit easier, semi-hydro is the way forward. I grow so many of my plants in it nowadays, and it's just simplified so much. It means that, as I say, I don't have to monitor soil. I'm much less susceptible to things like fungus gnats and certain types of soil pests. And just in terms of regulating watering in a big collection, it's been such a dream for me. So I would highly recommend giving it a go. But yeah, the thing I love with the Bueno is that every single leaf is slightly different in variegation. Like this one here doesn't seem to have much. I've got one down here that when it first came out, you guys were saying it looks like a little fish, and it really does. It's just absolutely adorable. So yeah, it's a plant that I just find very rewarding to grow, and it's one that maybe just like superficially looking at it, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't think it was particularly easy, but I'm telling you it is. I do very little to this one apart from keeping its reservoir filled. It's also very fast growing as well when it's kept in the right lighting conditions. Bright, kind of indirect bright light would be optimum for this plant if you're able to offer it. But yeah, those are the ones. Those are the ones currently that I would say are my top most interesting, easy to care for plants. I have got many, many more. So if you want a part 2 to this video, let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it useful. And if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.